Well, good morning. How are you guys doing?
Good morning.
Good. So how many of you had evangelism experience? So almost every hand goes up. Cool. So for some of you, this might be a basic evangelism training, but I know that you'll get things out of this, because for those of you who have not evangelized before or have a little experience to it, I'm going to teach you some really cool methods on going out to evangelize and how we do it biblically. For those of you who have more experience, my goal is that you're going to see, I've been trained as a teacher by some of the best around, and have really learned how to stage information properly so that it helps people learn it at the lay level. And so my goal is, if you already know how to do evangelism, well, then you need to start teaching others to do it. And I believe that the way that this is staged will help you put things into categories right to be able to teach it to people easily, that they can remember it. So, basic evangelism training. There we go. So our objectives this morning, yes, this is like a teaching course, so we have objectives, which you may or may not be tested on today, before you leave. Number one, be able to recite the gospel and give the chapter and verses. I know when I go to churches and I ask if somebody can give the gospel to me, less than 10% of people can give the gospel to me in 30 seconds. I'm just being honest with you. People who go to churches for years can't give me the gospel succinctly. That's an issue, right? So you need to make sure before you walk out those doors today that you know the gospel. And we're going to go through that. Be able to use a good opening line. So when we get into evangelism, a lot of people are like, well, how do I get started in this? Well, I'm going to give you some lines that are really easy to use that work on everybody in every situation to open up into conversation. We want you to be able to use the good person test. So how many of you have heard of the good person test before? Most of us, good. So you're trained well then. Good person test is one of my favorite things to use. And if you haven't used it before, what the goal is you just kind of memorize the good person test, and then as you do it over time, it'll become more conversational, right? We don't need to be robots, and we don't need to take Ray's voice as cool as it is, right? We use our own voices, but we don't want to be robots when we do this. We want to be very conversational. And then we want to know, how do we respond to the unbeliever who still, after going through the good person test, right? We think we've got them, right? We think we've shown them their sin, and they know that they're destined for hell, and yet they still say at the end of that, they're still a pretty good person. I mean, God's still going to look upon me favorably. What do we do in that situation? Because that comes up all the time. And there is a really easy way to deal with that contradiction, or what they would perceive as a contradiction. And the reality is you will succeed. Nobody fails my classes. Okay? Cool. So how do we reach the lost? This is one of my favorite places to go preach in. It is Union Square of New York City. If you want to see the craziest of crazies, and you want to see every type of people group and every type of philosophy that's out there, go to Union Square on a Friday night or a Saturday night. It reminds me of Paul in Athens, when you have all the different peoples out there just postulating all day long, philosophers. That's what Union Square reminds me of. Plus, you got the Hare Krishnas banging their drums over here, waiting for their God to yank them from their little ponytails, and you've got all kinds of other groups roaming around there. It's a pretty wild place to go talk to people. Obviously, prayer, right? Evangelism starts in prayer. It doesn't start with us going out on the streets trying to hand out that first tract. It does start in prayer. And I'm as guilty as anyone else, right? What is the big issue in churches today, I would say? Lack of prayer. This is what I see in general across the country. And we need to be bathed in prayer when we go out and evangelize. So, quiz. First quiz question. Blank is the power of God to salvation. Is it my good looks? It's definitely not that. Is it my ability to give good evidences? Is it my ability to win somebody over by sweet-talking them? No? Is it my ability to give a very convincing argument? No. Y'all shaking your heads, so that's good. What is it? What's the answer? It's the gospel, right? Romans 1:16 says the gospel is the power of God to salvation. The gospel is. Which means, here's the take-home message. If you learn nothing else in this morning session than the gospel, you have enough, according to God, for people to be saved. Know your gospel message. Now, does it mean apologetics are bad? No, that's not what I said. Apologetics are good. Our ability to reason with people, very good. But everything has to terminate in this gospel message. Everything does. And in fact, when we do our apologetics, if we are not beelining to the gospel as soon as we possibly can, we're doing apologetics wrong. It has to be about the gospel. So, here's a big lie about evangelism. You've probably heard this before. Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. Big lie, isn't it?
Big lie.
I mean, we just talked about the gospel as the power of God to salvation. And so, how are people going to get the gospel? I kid you not, I had a church at one time years ago where the pastor talked about evangelism for the day. This was in my really infant years of Christianity, right after I first got saved. And he said, you know what you do? You take your lawnmower and you mow really straight lines. And if you go back and forth and you mow really straight lines, your neighbor's going to say, you know, there's something different about that guy. And that's how they get the gospel of Jesus Christ. What? Are you serious? I don't know about you, but if somebody walked around me long enough, like, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, they're going to see me sin. And they're going to see every one of you sin, right? We are not the gospel ourselves. People aren't going to look at us and follow us and think, oh, it must be about Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong, our lives make a difference, right? Our personal holiness makes a difference. The way we walk, people are watching, right? The unbelieving world watches us. But that isn't the gospel. And that's what I want to make sure we understand. And so, in Romans 10, it tells us that we have the responsibility to speak the good news. We have a responsibility to preach it. So in verse 14 it says, how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed, right? How will unbelievers hear about Jesus Christ? And then you read a couple verses down, verse 17, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. It's got to be words. Spoken or written, it's got to be words. And so we speak it to people, or we hand them a paper missionary, a gospel tract, and they can get the gospel that way. Either way is perfectly good. What isn't good is our mouths being closed. So that brings us now to chapter 1. What is the actual gospel? Right? We're not ashamed of this. People say this all the time. Not ashamed of the gospel. What is the gospel? Well, we know already that it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. So this is where the power lies. And so, well, that just jumped ahead. So now, I'm going to give everyone here 2 minutes, which is about 90 seconds longer than it should take to write down the gospel. So, your time starts now. Okay, so you've got this gospel in front of you. Let's compare it to what the Bible says about the gospel. See, I get this all the time where I'm preaching on my box, right? I'm in a college campus or on a street corner, especially college campuses, and you'll have this group of people come up to you. And they stand right there, really quiet, and their hands folded so nicely. You know they're not that raving, that ravaging atheist, right? And you get done, your buddy comes up next, and you get off the box, you're like, oh, can I help you? Oh, we really appreciate that you're here. We're from Crew, usually. Used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ. We're from Crew, and, we just think you're doing it all wrong. Doing what all wrong? Well, you're not preaching the gospel. Oh, yeah, well, what's the gospel? And they say, well, it's all about God's love. To which they say, oh, really? Well, if you have your Bible handy, let's open up to 1 Corinthians 15. Because see, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he's addressing the Corinthian church, and he says, now we remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you. This is verse 1. And then he goes on to remind them of the gospel he preached them. Verses 3 and 4. Hint, this is one of the things you need to know before you're allowed to walk out the doors today. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4. If you don't know this, memorize it. That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. That he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. This is the basic gospel message here. And I've got the underlines in the important parts here. That it's his death, burial, and resurrection, right? For the payment of our sin. Another bullet point up there. All according to what? The Scriptures. So important that Paul wrote it twice. This is all in accordance to the Scriptures. That his death, burial, and resurrection is the penalty that was paid for those who repent and believe. This is gospel message. If on your sheet of paper right now you do not have Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection for our sins in accordance to the Scriptures, write it down. Because that's the answer. And that's the answer we need to know when we go out witnessing to people. If we don't give that, we have not given the gospel. I'm being honest with you. And so this has now, can we package it with other stuff? Yeah. Can we put more scripture in here? Absolutely. Can we bring up 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20 and 21? About he who knew no sin became sin in order that we might become the righteousness of God. Absolutely. That's a great verse to use. That itself is not the gospel. A lot of people give me that answer too. It's a great adjunct to it. But this is the gospel message that has to be preached. We talk about love. Now, is love part of the gospel?
Absolutely.
Of course it is, right? The funny thing is, in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4, was the word love contained in there? No. As Jeff Pollard, who's the head of one of the biggest tract ministries in the world down in Pensacola, Florida, Chapel Library, he's a pastor there and head of this ministry. I heard him teach in a conference one time about the book of Acts. He says, we got the book of Acts. This is the greatest evangelistic book ever written. There's multiple gospel presentations in there, multiple witnessing encounters in there. He goes, you know how many times the word love appears in the entire book of Acts? A big goose egg. It's not there. Now, does that mean that Paul didn't understand the love of the gospel? No, that's not what it means, right? Love is all over the gospel. And I would go this far as to say that the reason why Christ was on the cross is because of his love for sinners. Right? The greatest display of love this world has ever seen is Christ, who knew no sin, became sin in order that we might become the righteousness of God. That Christ on the cross, we saw the biggest display of wrath ever seen, where the Father poured his wrath out on his own Son, the same wrath that we pour out in eternity for sinners who aren't repentant. But that it was also the love of God was displayed on that cross. So this is where the love is connected. And in fact, I would point you to anywhere in the New Testament that you see God's love for people, guess what it's always connected to? The cross. John 3:16, that every good Christian should have memorized, right? For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son. 1 John 4, great place. Homosexuals love to say, God is love. And I say, you're right, God is love. Keep reading. Because the next couple of verses it says, for the love of God was made manifest in his Son's death on the cross. God's greatest expression of love is his Son's death on the cross, as it says in 1 John 4. So love is certainly a large part of the gospel, but don't put the cart before the horse. So here's an objection that some people might give me as I'm training. What if I do not know enough about apologetics, right? That's great, Anthony. You got the gospel to us. We heard it loud and clear. We got it written down if you didn't get it right. We're going to go out and give this. But what about if I don't know enough apologetics? What was Romans 1:16 about again? Where does the power lie? In the gospel, right? Does it align the apologetics? No. And you're going to find on Saturday, if you guys are going to be here, I will go through presuppositional apologetics parts 1 and 2. Bring it down to the lay level. You don't have to read Bonson and Van Til and all those guys that are impossible to read. We're going to bring it down to lay level, and I'm going to make a biblical case for you as to why we need to be presuppositional in our apologetic, Bible first. And I'm also going to make the case, even guys that I'm not a huge fan of, other than for Christians, right? So to grow in our love for Christ more. The evidences that Josh McDowell and Lee Stroll will give, great evidences for us, right? It strengthens us. It's really cool. But evidences don't change people's hearts. It's the gospel that does this, right? So our goal is to go from apologetics to the gospel as quickly as possible. It doesn't matter if we don't know a lot about apologetics. As we grow in our faith, as we grow in our evangelism, yes, learn apologetics. Learn these things. They're very helpful in our evangelism outreaches. This is really cool. Now, unfortunately, I don't have my computer up here, so I can't read this for you as cool as this is. If anybody wants it, email me and I'll send you the dialogue on this. But Charles Spurgeon, does anybody know how he got saved? It's really a cool story. And it goes to show, and it should show every one of us that we are all adequate to give the gospel. Every one of us is. So, again, I'm going to butcher the story because the word choice that Charles Spurgeon used is just phenomenal compared to what I can do up here. But basically, Charles was a teenager, and he was walking to church, which was a pretty far distance, and it was in the middle of a snowstorm. He couldn't walk any further, so he turned off to the side into just this little, I think it was a Methodist church. Turned off into it, went in, maybe a dozen or so people that were there. And the way he tells the story is that the pastor didn't show up. Perhaps he must have gotten caught in the snowstorm as well. And he goes, so some guy, like some shoemaker or something, stood up and preached. And the way Charles talks about it is this guy had no business preaching, right? He wasn't a preacher, wasn't a gifted orator, but he got up and he read from, I think it was a psalm, and he gave a couple of words to it. Then he points out Charles, knowing he was a new guy, and preached him about what he's going to do with Christ. And Charles Spurgeon got saved. By a guy who wasn't a gifted preacher, who could barely put two words together, according to Charles Spurgeon. And yet he got saved by him. It's a fascinating story. And I'm like, you know what? If God can use a guy like that, to save a guy like that, you think he can use every one of us? Just amazing to me to think about. And so now what we're going to do is I'm going to let you stay in your safe groups now, and then we're going to be switching later. And turn to the person next to you if you don't have someone next to you. Like, I'm going to let you and my son talk. Get into groups of 2, and what I want you to do is give the gospel to one another. So if you can't give the death, burial, and resurrection for our sins according to the scriptures, if you don't have it memorized and you can't give that, then just read 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 and 4 to one another. And so I'm going to give you just about 2 minutes to do that back and forth a few times. Okay, we are going to get back started again. So I hope you guys enjoy just getting a little bit of practice in, because here's the reality. What I find in training is that the more we actually do it in safe spaces, so to speak, the more we hear our voices say it, the more likely we'll be to do it out there, right? And that's why we go through some of this practice. So now we're going to transition to chapter 2, what I call application of the gospel. What do we know about the unbeliever? Now, I'm going to tell you, and we're going to dive into this far more on Saturday, but we're going to kind of bullet point it out this morning. What do we know about the unbeliever? Because this is really important in how we evangelize, and the confidence we should have in God's word about evangelism. And here's the reality. Everyone knows God exists, according to Romans 1. Every single person we walk up to knows God exists. Wait a minute, Dr. Silvestro, you're telling me that the staunch atheist who swears up and down God doesn't exist, you're telling me he knows God exists? Yep. You mean that Jehovah's Witness, who's really ardent and just stands there, he knows the real God exists? Yep, absolutely. Every single person, I'm confident, according to God's Word, knows the true God that exists. Now, what do they do with that? Well, if they don't know the true God or won't acknowledge they know the truth of God, they suppress the truth about Him in their sin. They try to block Him out. Which, by the way, goes back to one of my favorite books to teach on is Genesis. I got my start in speaking on 11, 12 years ago, teaching on biblical creation. And Adam and Eve did the same thing, didn't they? They sinned and attempted to hide from God. Attempted to block Him out. And we know from the very beginning that you can't hide from God. So imagine how every person we walk up to knows God exists, number one. And number two, when they don't acknowledge Him, they're just hiding from Him. Pretending to, anyway. They're just suppressing the truth about Him in their sin. They're actively trying to block Him out of their minds. Well, why would they do this? Well, it's because of this. Well, I'll say this first. Great comfort is a great saying. Atheists can't find God for the same reason thieves can't find a policeman, right? They do their best to hide from the one who's the policeman. So now we go into Romans 2. The moral law is written on everyone's heart. So everybody knows God exists. If they don't acknowledge the true God, they're suppressing about Him in their sin. And according to Romans 2, that the moral law is actually written on everyone's heart. So that the sinner knows their sin. A terrible depiction of this in cartoons and movies and whatnot is, how many of you have seen when somebody's trying to make this really hard decision, right, a moral decision, and you got an angel on one shoulder and Satan on the other, right? And they're being talked to in their ears. It's a terrible depiction of what God has done in our hearts with our conscience. He's given us a knowledge of right from wrong. And so everybody we walk up to has this knowledge. And that not only does creation testify and bear witness to God's existence to them, so does everyone's conscience. We know God exists based on conscience. And the bottom line is, as we see at the end of Romans, this passage in Romans 1, so verse 20, where everyone knows God exists, they're suppressing the truth about Him in their sin. When they don't acknowledge God, they turn to idols or false gods. The reality is that they're all without excuse. When every unbeliever dies and has to face God, right? Hebrews 9:27, every man's appointed once to die and then the judgment. When they face God, they're not going to be able to tell God, you know, God, I'm sorry, you just didn't give me enough evidences. Like, I just didn't get enough on earth to know that you exist. And He's going to say, nonsense, I knew you not. Get away from you, workers of iniquity. You're without excuse. Creation and conscience testifies to my existence. You know it. You blocked it out on purpose. Again, this scripture applies to every single person we encounter. I will dive into these far more deep on Saturday and really give a lot of good explanation about this. Okay, another quiz. 4 things we can know for sure about Romans 1 and Romans 2. The unbeliever knows who exists? God exists. Number 2, the unbeliever knows God's moral law written on the heart. When the unbeliever doesn't acknowledge God, they're suppressing the truth, good. And then the unbeliever exchanges the truth about God for a lie or idols, right? Both of those are in that passage. So because we're made to worship, we end up worshiping something else when it's not the one true God. Why is this so important? Because God has laid the foundation for evangelism for us. God has already prepared the person that we're walking up to. They know He exists. The person says, I don't believe God exists. Yeah, you do. You know. And I'll explain how you deal with that on Saturday morning. When they say things like that. I do not believe a single person when they tell me God doesn't exist. Not a single one of them. So they all know. They know the moral law. So as we walk into the understanding of the good person test and why it works, why it's so useful, why it's the only biblical method for sharing the gospel, the law and the gospel, is because this plays right into the fact they know God exists. The moral law is written on their hearts. We're pricking their conscience as we go through the law in this good person test, and that they're suppressing the truth about God, and we're now making him bubble to the surface. That's what's happening when we talk to people. And mind you, think about this. When the unbeliever is suppressing the truth about God, right, they're trying to block him out of their minds. What response do we often get from unbelievers? Are they happy and joyful? No. What are they usually? Angry, upset, right? They might maybe go into attack mode. Why are they doing this? Because they're so desperately trying to keep God blocked out that when we're pricking their conscience using the moral law, they got a problem. They can't hide from God. And that's why we see the anger from people. It's all because of what God's prepared already for us in evangelism. And so how do we break the ice, right? So, okay, this is great, Anthony. We're learning about the gospel. We're learning about how everybody is prepared for evangelism, right? Everyone's prepared for us. God has already done the work for us. How do we break the ice? Well, gospel tracts. We've got thousands of them out here. Grab them, hand them to people. And sometimes you may not just want to stand there and hand out gospel tracts. That's fine. Sometimes you might want to say, hey, have you got one of these? If you want to be even more bold, say, hey, it has a really important message on it about Jesus Christ and about your eternity. And somebody might just stop and talk to you. It's a great way to open up a conversation with someone. I love gospel tracts for that reason. And there's a lot of good ones out there. So some people don't like the pragmatism. I think they're fun. So man card, if you're on a beach, I have man cards that I give out. And I'll tell you, the burliest of men who you think you'd be intimidated to give a gospel tract to, when he's got a young lady by his side, they're like, hey, did you get your man card yet? The girl always laughs, and he has to take one. It's great. So I love that tract. Santa Claus tract. At Christmas time, who doesn't like a Santa Claus tract? That's a fun one to give out. If you're not into the pragmatic thing, there's some really good ones out there. And I know we've got a couple left that are up front, Christ alone, but there's some really well-written gospel tracts out there. This is one of my friends. They don't produce gospel tracts anymore, but you can get these remade other places now. Okay, aside from gospel tracts, what else can we do? Well, how about some witnessing opening lines? These are some lines you may want to write down. If you don't have some good ones already, write some of these down. You'll be able to use them over the next 3 days. You can ask the question, what's your spiritual background? Yes, you can walk up to somebody who you haven't had a relationship with and ask that question to. They might say no. They might walk right past you and not acknowledge it. That's okay. But you can ask this line. It's a great line to open up with. Because when somebody says, when you ask them what their spiritual background is, what do you think they're going to ask you next? What's yours? Right? Oftentimes, that's what comes back to you. So a nice way to open up. Here's another one. One of my favorites. What good plans do you have for the weekend? Now, it doesn't quite work here because you already know what they're doing for the weekend, right? They're here at Pella. But when you're on a Friday and you're at the bank, seeing a bank teller, I used to do this a lot when we owned our dental practice, I'd ask them, hey, what good plans do you have for the weekend? And after they tell you, they ask you the same question back. To which I respond, oh yeah, well, I've got this going on. I'm going to church on Sunday, of course. By the way, do you go to church? Easy transition. Right? How about this one? Are you familiar with the founders of Tulip Time and their beliefs? So John gave a presentation this morning on what is Tulip Time and some of the background. So how many people are here just to look at pretty flowers? Right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed walking around yesterday seeing all the pretty flowers. But you can ask the question, are you aware why we do this pretty flower festival every year? What's behind it, right? And that can transition you to a spiritual conversation to the gospel. One of my favorites, probably my favorite line to give is, if you died today, do you believe you would go to heaven or hell? And why? I can use this on people I walk up cold to and ask this question. And it's one of those questions that nearly everybody thinks about, no matter what their background is. And most people, if they have the time, are willing to stand there and give you their opinion on it. And now you're in a conversation where you can share your truth about it. But this is my favorite one. This is one I use most of the time. And that's one of my favorite tracks. If you die tonight, are you ready? Neat track is right to the point. Don't make the mistake of handing this out at a funeral. Probably not the right time. My wife found out a few years ago. Probably should have a softer one, but you know what? It elicited a lot of responses, didn't it? And made people think a little bit. So that's my wife Julie in the black coat right there. But some great opening lines for you to be able to go out and use. And you know what? Try them all when you're out there on the streets if you want to. But these are great. Just walk up to people and see what they have to say. Okay, what happens if somebody says, I am more good than bad? Because, let's be honest, if you've done the good person test for a while, or if you've asked the question, where do you think you go when you die? The vast majority of people, including professing Christians, will say, well, I'm more good than bad. I mean, the scales of justice, right? Like, my good's going to be a little heavier than the bad side, and God's going to look favorably upon that. I mean, God's a forgiving God anyway. These are the answers we hear from the vast majority of people. Even good churches, the majority of people say this. So we need to learn how to combat this objection. And it might come in the form of, well, I haven't murdered anybody. One of my friends who's not a friend of mine, he's a pastor who was on my evangelism team a few years ago. And actually, he might have been when you were with us, Pastor Ken Fontenot. If you don't remember, maybe it was that same year. Pastor Ken Fontenot came to Master's Academy. He really, for some reason, the computer just went out. You might just have to touch the screen. Anthony, can you go tap the password in case it's a password issue? Oh, you got it. Okay, thank you. So he did a good person test with people before he even came to Master's Academy. He loved Great Comfort videos. He just wanted to come out and meet Great Comfort for a weekend. And he's in inner city in North Carolina, one of the cities in North Carolina. And he walked up to somebody and says, well, hey, so have you ever murdered anyone before? And the good person test, right? The guy goes, yeah, about 10 years ago. He goes, what? It was actually true. I'd never had that happen to me before. But it took him by surprise, and then he kind of got himself right. And sure, the gospel guy got out of prison, not too much earlier, and was walking the streets again. So you never know what you're going to hear out there. Some people say, well, I haven't done terrible things, right? They're begging upon the fact they think that their good outweighs their bad. Or, here's my favorite, but I'm not as bad as that guy. Now here's the problem with this logic, right? And we can all fall into this logic, by the way, is, you know what, well, I haven't murdered anybody, but that guy has, right? That guy's really the bad guy, I'm not that bad. But you know what, that one guy that's sitting in prison who murdered the one person is saying, I had one bad night. I mean, one bad decision, and I murdered my spouse. But you know what? I mean, that was it. The guy next to me, he murdered 10 people. I'm actually a pretty good person. And I know you're sitting and laughing, but this is what people think. Because in our sinful flesh, we want to compare ourselves always to somebody that we perceive to be worse than us. Every one of us can justify our behaviors that way and think that we're better than we actually are. And so we have to recognize this is a very common objection out there. Probably the most common objection. And so, why is this the common answer for being a good person? Well, what is their standard of good? See, this is what it comes down to, and I'm getting a little theological on you right now. How do we define good? Like if somebody asked you, how do you define good? Unfortunately, this weekend, I don't have time to get into what I think is one of the best presentations out there of how do we answer the problem of evil. A lot of guys that teach on this don't teach it adequately, unfortunately. But it really comes down to this issue. What is the standard of good? If you had to give me a definition right now of good, what would it be? God. Yeah, that's it. God is good. That's our definition. It is on God. Because see, if we define good in any other way, it's subjective. Any type of human perspective, what I call a horizontal reasoning, if we try to, as humans, come up with a convention to figure out what is the definition of good, it will always fall short. Somebody else can come up with a different convention, and who's to say which one's right? So the only way we can define good is because God is the standard. God is good, and the moral law is not what he says necessarily. The moral law is based off of his good character. Right? That's where we get the moral law from. And he codified it in the Ten Commandments and other laws throughout the Bible. And so it's that moral standard based off of him being the standard of good that is projected down onto us to have the moral law. That's a proper view of good. And so with this as the background, what is the standard of good? See, as Christians, when we recognize God as good, that means, Romans 3, we all fall short of the glory of God. No one is good, no, not one. And it's only with this definition that that's true in Romans 3. The average person out there thinks that good is, I'm pretty good. I'm better than that guy. That's the definition, right, for the average person. So they have it wrong. We recognize Deuteronomy 32:4 that God is a God of faithfulness and without iniquity. He's just and he's upright. That the Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. He is righteous in all his ways. He's the standard. We also know God is holy, right? He himself, 1 Peter 1. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Look, there's only two ways to go to heaven. Now before you stone me, let me explain. You either must be absolutely perfect, which none of us can be, or you must rely upon the righteousness of Christ through repentance and faith in the gospel. So, by all intents and purposes, there's really only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. But he does say, right, be perfect. So what is the true state of man? We already talked about this, Romans 3, all men are wretched sinners. Romans 5, death comes to all men because all men have sinned. Every one of us is going to die. And every one of us is going to face God. You either get a free pass directly to heaven if you're cloaked in the righteousness of Christ, or you go directly to hell for eternity, eventually the lake of fire, for eternity, with God's wrath being poured out upon you. And why is this the case? Because God is just. So not only is God love, right? A lot of unbelievers want to say, well, God is love. Like, why would he send me there? I mean, why would he send good old me there who's really a pretty good person? Why? Because God is just. He must punish for sin. And because all of us are sinners, guess what he must do? Punish. Right? Every one of us in here, based on our works, based on our merit, deserves God's just punishment. Right? Based on what we've done, we deserve hell for eternity. It is only by God's grace and mercy that we don't. Because God's justice was either going to be paid in hell for eternity on every unbeliever, or it was already paid on the cross. Either way, God's justice was satisfied for every single person, or will be satisfied. And so, as I said, we deserve just punishment. So, let's talk about the good news and the bad news here. This is a great quote from Ray Comfort. I'm going to give you a little word picture here. Imagine, I'm a dentist by profession, imagine a medical doctor, who, they would call us not real doctors, I don't know why. But imagine a medical doctor who says, he goes, I just found the cure for cancer. I'm going to run up and down I've spoken at so many conferences, by the way, and there's not been a parade that same day. I get to finally use this where there's an actual parade there. I'm going to run up and down the parade route and yell to everybody that I've got a cure for cancer, I've got a cure for cancer. Come get this cure for cancer. Knowing full well that in a parade of, say, 10,000 people, let's say 10,000 people are in the parade today, or along the side of the parade, that you're going to have a couple percent of them at any given time have cancer right now. Some will know it, some won't. That's just statistics. And so you would think that this guy running up and down the parade route, people would be like, oh, this is great, he's got a cure for cancer. But the reality is, people are going to say, what? Well, that's really cool, you've got the cure for cancer, but you know what? I don't have cancer. I don't need the cure. And this is exactly what happens when we proclaim the gospel if we do not talk about the law and people's sin. If we don't use things like the good person test, if we don't use the law to show people their sin, if we don't show them their sickness, their disease, where they're bound for, which is eternal damnation, if they don't understand this, then the good news isn't going to be good news to them. Right? The people who want the cure for cancer are the ones who actually have cancer. So people need to know their sickness. They need to know the bad news first before they receive the good news. Which brings us now to chapter 3, the good person test. So how do we show people their sin? How do we let them see their sickness, their disease? Well, I think that this is the easiest way to do it. So, same picture again from earlier. How do we reach the lost? Well, we use the law. Galatians 3:24. Therefore the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. So we use the law. This is the tutor. And how do we do this easily? Through the Ten Commandments. We help people see themselves as lawbreakers against God. Right? Sin is lawlessness. So every time somebody has sinned, they've literally broken God's law. They've literally broken God's law against God. If you run a traffic light, you've broken the law against the citizens of that city, which is enforced by the prosecutor, judge, and police. So God is the judge and the police and the one they're going to ultimately answer to, right? So every sin that happens is a law that's broken against God. We have to understand that. And so we use the law until someone has conviction by their conscience, right? The moral law is right on their heart. So as we give the law to them and we show them their sin using the law, we pray that the Holy Spirit, who is the one who makes salvation effectual, who is the one who pricks the conscience, we pray the Holy Spirit pricks the conscience as we're giving the law to people. And so once they recognize their law breaking, we now can give them the good news. We now can give them the solution to their problem, their sin problem. That's the way this works. And so the first 3 commandments: have no other gods before me. Have no idols or graven images. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Some that we can use when we're talking to people. Have you ever taken the Lord's name in vain? Right? It's blasphemy if you have. 6 and 7 commandments are really easy to use. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. What I really like about these is, what does the New Testament say about murder? It's not just the physical act of killing somebody with motive. It's about the heart. If you've spoken ill of someone before, you've murdered them in your heart. If you've hated someone before, you've murdered them in your heart. You're just as much of a murderer as the one who actually stabbed someone. Yes, there's worse consequences for actually stabbing somebody, but from God's perspective, they're both treacherous sins. Committing adultery. You say, I've never committed adultery. Yeah, well, did you take too long looking at that female or male walking by? You've lusted. You've committed adultery in your heart. Again, nowhere near the same thing as physical adultery from a consequence perspective, but as a heart perspective, we've committed adultery. And ultimately, as David in Psalm 51 says, who is every sin against? I've sinned against you and you alone, Lord. Every one of our sins, not only are sins against other people, but ultimately it's a sin against God. And this is what we have to communicate to the unbeliever. Of course, what did Jesus say about the heart? We already covered that part. Last 3 commandments. Do not steal. Right? Easy. Have you ever stolen anything? Even your employer's time? You're telling me you've never even stolen your employer's time? You never took a little extra long on that break? Didn't play games for a half hour on your phone when no one was looking? You stole from your employer. Do not lie. Doesn't say do not lie except little white lies. Right? Do not lie. Do not covet. Every one of us has done these things. And so this gives itself to what we call the good person test, where we're going to use 3 or 4 of the 10 commandments. Pick whichever ones you want. I find the easiest to use are things like lying, stealing, and lust. I usually use those 3. And so you use these 3 or 4 commandments. Ask people, hey, so if you die today, do you think you go to heaven or hell, and why? And most people tell you, heaven. It's okay, you're allowed to talk when you do that. So most people say heaven, and then you say why, and they say because I'm pretty good. I'm a good person, right? To which you say, hey, that's really cool. I'm glad you're a good person. You know, would you mind taking a good person test with me to see how good we actually are? And you do it with a smile on your face, and nearly everybody says, well, sure, that's fine. And so now you walk through the 10 commandments. Hey, have you ever told a lie in your life before? I mean, I have. Oh, you have too? Okay, what do you call yourself? Oh, a liar? Yeah, that's right. And we can work right through all of them. And eventually you get to the end, you do 3 or 4 of the 10 commandments, and you say, okay, well, now that you've admitted you're a lying, thieving, blasphemer, adulterate heart, now where do you think you're going to go, heaven or hell? Sometimes they're like, wow, that's not good. And you give them the good news, right? Sometimes they say, oh, well, God's still going to forgive me, to which then we go over that objection, which we'll do in a little bit here. So, as I just did with you, I use myself as an example, right? So I take that good person test with them. You don't have to, but I find that it lowers the barriers a little bit when you take it with them, and you just you smile when you do it, but you turn it to seriousness as you walk through this conversationally. And the reality is that you know your sin better than anyone else's, and so we recognize when we are giving the gospel to people, when we're going through this good person test, what keeps us humble, rather than being pointed at people about their sin, is that I know my sin better than anybody. Right? I know my own sin better than anybody. And I have to remember that it's by God's grace that I have been saved. And that means that everybody we talk to, we have to assume has the ability to be saved. That everybody we talk to, that if they're going to be saved, it's going to be by God's grace. The same grace that showered us. And that keeps us humble through these 10 commandments. So good person test. We're going to practice that here in just a moment. The ones we're going to use, have you ever told a lie? Have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever lusted, which is adultery of the heart? Have you ever hated or spoken ill of someone? This is murder of the heart. Have you ever taken the Lord's name in blasphemy? Or I'm sorry, the Lord's name in vain. This is blasphemy. And so, what I want us to do now is to get into different groups. So find somebody new now. And I want you to ask an opening question, and then I want you to give the good person test to one another. And if you really feel good, give the gospel right after that. Okay? So here's the practice script that you can go by. I'm going to leave it up here. If you die today, would you go to heaven or hell, and why? And then ask 3 or 4 of the 10 commandments, and then give the gospel. Now, this is not the time for us to play hard to get. You know, just let the person go through the good person test, and then after you do it once or twice, switch roles. And then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to have you find somebody else to do it with next. So 2 minutes starts now. Okay, let's find our seats and continue on.
It was nice to meet you. Good to meet you too.
Now, how many of you felt a little panicked with the amount of time I gave, or a little bit of time I gave? A little bit of panic, right?
Come on.
So this is one of our...
They didn't even get saved.
They didn't even get saved yet. She gave a little more time. Well, you know, part of the reason why we do this is because as part of my training as a teacher, when we give short periods of time for things, it causes you to have just a little bit of anxiety, causes you to work a little bit faster, and guess what it does for your brain cells? Supercharges them. And it helps you remember things better. And it's far more effective than if I would give you 15 minutes to practice, and then you would practice for 2 or 3 and then get into conversation the rest of the time. So we find that this method works really, really well in training. Okay, so did you enjoy the practice a little bit?
Yes.
Good. So now let's talk about objections, right? So we've practiced giving the gospel to one another. Now we've added to that, and we've talked about an opening line and a good person test and giving the gospel, right? We've got to hear our own voices say this a few times. Now we're about some of the most common objections. We're going to answer those in the remaining time we have today, and then we'll do a little more practice after that. Okay, so we saw the slide already. The number one objection, you go through the good person test, right? And you think, oh, this person knows that they're a wretched sinner, this person knows they're bound for hell, and so you ask them now, so now what do you think? And they still tell you, well, you know, I'm still more good than bad. You know, I'm still really not that bad of a person. I haven't murdered anyone today. Like, so you're gonna hear these things, and so what do we do when that happens? Well, I like to do what's called setting up a courtroom scene. And so whoever I'm talking to, let's say it's a lady she looks 60 years old. I'm going to say, so how old are you? About 40, right? Yeah. And that always endears them to you, like right there. So you're about 40? Oh, no, I'm really about 60. Oh, well, you're about 40. So I'm just going to go with 40. And then what you do is you say, you know, I've got a question for you. What happens if you ran a red light and you got arrested, you got put in front of a judge? Would the judge be able to let you off of your crime because you tell him you're a pretty good person? Would that work? No, like we know that. Like that doesn't work here on earth. So why do you think that would work with God? And then I get into the actual courtroom scene and say, okay, I want you to assume something. Let's assume that, you're 40 right now. So let's assume that for the first 35 years of your life, you were perfect. You never sinned, you never broke the law. Now that'll usually get a chuckle, right? Because you already went through the good person test with them. So they're like, yeah, that'd be fun. She goes, hey, I'm really not. But okay, let's just assume you were perfect for 35 years of your life. Never sinned, never broke the law. And then, 5 years ago, you decide to rob a bank. You got away with $1 million. Didn't get caught. 5 more years goes by to now, and you want to get their name, by the way. I'm going to say Melissa. Hopefully there's no Melissas in here. I'm going to say Melissa. So, okay, Melissa. So now the cops come knocking on your door and they say, Melissa, we have a warrant for your arrest. Put your handcuffs and bring it in front of the judge. And the judge says, Melissa, we couldn't figure out who this was 5 years ago. These videotapes we couldn't read are now readable through technology. And these videotapes are clearly you, Melissa. You are the one who robbed $1 million. How do you plead to these charges? Are you innocent or guilty? Now, because you use this person's name, they'll be like, well, I would be guilty. I say, you're right, Melissa, you would be guilty. Now, Melissa, will you be able to tell the judge, Judge, I'm a pretty good person. I mean, I treat people well. I love people. I walk old ladies across the streets. I mean, I donate money. I donate time. Did I mention I love people? I mean, I've done all these wonderful things. I mean, I only broke one law. I robbed one bank. And I gave most of that money away anyway. What would the judge do? Well, if he's fair and he's just, what's he going to do? Melissa? Well, I would be found guilty. You're right. And would you be given just punishment? Yes. Right? So Melissa, what you're telling me now is, even on earth, where we have imperfect judges, and you believe you're a good person, you've only broken one law, you know that judge can't let you off the crime that you committed. Why do you think the perfect creator, the perfect judge of the universe, is going to let you off for all the sins that you've already admitted to committing? That is powerful when we do that. Because they've been able to try to skirt around, right, up to this point, to still lean on the fact they're a good person, that somehow God's going to look favorably. And now you've shown them, look, an imperfect judge on earth isn't going to look upon you favorably. What do you think the real judge of the universe is going to think? He's going to find you guilty. But you know what? There's good news. And then you give them the gospel. Right? Call them to repentance and faith. Very, very powerful to use this method. And so, we give them the gospel message, which is, what is our address for it in Scripture?
1 Corinthians 15.
You can all say it. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4. Good. Repetition is also one of my tricks to use, so that we get things put up into our minds. And so, what if now somebody says, oh, that's all well and good, but you know what? Judge not, lest you be judged. I mean, who are you to judge me? Right? You're also a sinner. You took a good person test with me. The Bible says don't judge. Well, this is one of the reasons why we include ourselves in the good person test. But what if somebody says, judge not? What do we do?
Are you judging?
What's that? So I didn't hear what you said. What's that?
Are you judging me?
Yeah, you can certainly say that, right? Are you judging me right now?
We're not the judge.
Oh, that's right. All I've done, yeah, I've just run through the 10 commandments with you. A few of them. I've not judged you at all. You know what did judge you? The very breath of God. God's word judged you. God himself. God, look, I'm not the one you have to worry about. You're not going to face me when you die. You're going to face your Maker. Give me Hebrews 9:27 there, right? Every man's appointed once to die and then the judgment. But that's what we do, right? We're not judging them. God does. And that should terrify them. What about our conduct? So we're going to go out there, right? And people are having a really good time because, I don't know about you, but I love seeing flowers, as I said earlier. There's a lot of pretty colors out there. Fun to see. How should we act with people? Well, our conduct is important. How we treat people. Use sir and ma'am when possible. Say hello. Be friendly. Have a smile on your face, right? There's a reason why performers in Broadway put Vaseline on all their front teeth. I don't know if you knew that or not. That's how they keep a smile the whole time, because nobody wants to feel their lip on Vaseline. So yeah, if you need to do that, go get some Vaseline and go out and witness that way. But that'll keep a smile on your face all day. I know it sounds disgusting. I've tried it. It is weird, I admit. But have a smile on your face, right? And that goes a long way in terms of how people view us as evangelists. Okay, what about the children? How do you witness to a child? Please don't go up to a 5-year-old and say, have you ever committed lust in your life? Probably not the best thing, although in some places in New York City, you never know what you're going to hear out there. What about children? You know what? I find children to be really, really easy. Hey kids, have you ever told a lie to your parents? And what did all the kids do? They laugh a little bit. Yeah, a lot of them. Have you ever stolen anything from your parents? And they laugh a little. My favorite to use is, hey, okay kids, have you always, without fail, 100% of the time, listened to your mother and your father? And that gets the biggest laugh of them all, right? So you only need to use one of these on a child. And they immediately know they're a sinner. They immediately know they've done what they've done. To which we say, your mother and father are God's representatives of himself for you on earth. He has entrusted you to your parents. And he calls you to be obedient to your parents at all times. The fifth commandment says, honor your father and your mother. And you know what? There's no age limit to that. That's a perpetual law. And so we can do this with kids, and kids, I find, they seem to be the most terrifying, right, to witness to. I find them to be the easiest. Now, the only thing I have to be mindful with kids is that, when there's parents there next to them, right, that you've got to be mindful about that, because parents can be really protective, because we're those evil, mean, older Christians nowadays who do nothing but club homosexuals over the head with hammers, apparently. But, be kind and talk to the adults, and as you're talking to the adults, include the kids in with it. And a lot of parents, when you ask the kid, hey, have you always obeyed your mother, like, full time? And now the parent thinks that you're on their side too, right? So it's a wonderful way to witness to kids. In this picture, we had a Ray Comfort thing set up, and it was at a festival in Ohio. And kids were coming up left and right to take this, whatever test we had up on the screen thing there. And so kids were coming up the whole time, and we were able to witness to them very easily using those couple of questions. So on that is the end of this morning's presentation. And John, I think we're going to practice until noon today, right? So we're going to practice. What I will do is I'm going to talk about my book for a moment, and then I will open it up to any Q&A of any pressing questions on evangelism, and then we're going to get right into practice. So one of my books, my only book I've written so far is on the table. It's called On the Origin of Kinds. So you may recognize the cover because those pictures are Darwin's, of his finches. The cover is the same cover as one of the earlier covers of Darwin's book in the 1800s. The font is the same font that was used in one of his earlier books. If you flip it over on the back, you'll see a picture of me in a black hat with a black trench coat, which is how Darwin is often pictured. All for the purpose of atheists to find it on websites and to buy the book and get fooled, which has happened. Find it hilarious. But my goal for this book was to take 3 disciplines. So there's a lot of really good books on creation science. There's a lot of good books on presupposition apologetics, although I'd argue most of them are too high level for most of us to read. There's also a lot of good books on biblical evangelism. I mean, look no further than Living Waters Ministry, they got them all. There's no book in existence that I know of that takes all 3 of those disciplines and combines them into one book, with the goal of getting you to think biblically and think presuppositionally as you witness to people, as you talk to people. So I walk through Genesis and all the important points in Genesis, how that relates itself into what a proper apologetic is and what the proper gospel message is. And in the end, it terminates in biblical evangelism, putting it all together. So it's a one-of-a-kind book out there. And a lot of the concepts that are in the book I'll be covering as well on Saturday. So you'll kind of hear me say it, see me demonstrate it, and then you'll still have it in the book to refer back to as you continue to process presuppositionalism. Andrew Rappaport, one of my ministry partners, wrote some really good books. How many of you have been intimidated to ever read a systematic theology that's about this thick? Right? Wayne Grudem and stuff. I have a rule. If a book is over 220 pages, I don't buy it, because I know I'll never get through it. So I only do small books. That's why mine's like at 218 pages. So I will not go past 220. I don't know why that number, but I find I'm intimidated after that. So, okay. Andrew wrote a book called What Do We Believe? It's a systematic theology of the Christian faith. About 200 pages. It is an unbelievable condensed version of systematic theology written at a lay level. It is an amazing book. If you've never gone through systematic theology before, get that book. It's phenomenal, easy to go through. He also wrote another book called What Do They Believe? And actually the first book he wrote was What Do They Believe? He spent 14 years researching the cults Mormonism, Catholicism, Islam, Judaism, Jehovah's Witnesses, a few others. And he researched them, thoroughly understood what they teach in not just their main book, but all their side writings. He went to leaders within those churches and said, am I representing you correctly for my book? He got sign-offs for every one of those religions, and then published a book with all those in it. And the last chapter of the book is what do we believe as Christians, right? How does it differ from all these false religions? And it's that chapter he then turned into an entire book, which is the What Do We Believe, which is the second book he came out with. So usually my ministry partner's with me, he sells them for like 15 bucks a piece. When I'm alone, I always give a conference discount. They're 10 bucks a piece this weekend. So I deal with the consequences after I sell them. So those books are 10 bucks a piece out there. Are there any pressing questions that you have right now before we get into a little bit more practice this morning about evangelism? Okay, so if there's no more questions, we're going to break off into partners again, find a different partner now, and I want you to go through the opening line, the good person test, and give the gospel. Okay, we want to do all those things. And if then you want to be a little fun with it, give an objection. Well, I'm still a pretty good person, and throw that courtroom scene into it. Try the courtroom scene a little bit. And this time when you get together with your partner, we'll probably give you, there's only about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give you till noon to do that practice. I went around Lord willing all weekend, and so if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to come up to me and talk to me. I know some speakers, like, they'll hide off in green rooms all day, and I am not one of those guys. I will be here till the end of the evening. I will be here as long as possible to answer every question, talk to anybody who wants to talk. So that's my policy. On that, I thank you for listening, and I look forward to today, the gospel outreach, as well as being back tomorrow morning. And I'll be teaching against the social justice movement. It's a systematic theology of social justice. I'm sure you've not heard it spoken in this way before, and you'll learn how to speak on this after you leave tomorrow. So on that, get practicing.